No one will be able to sit out this crisis.
Russia is inching towards an all-out invasion.
25,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 is not shocking considering they had previously attacked Crimea in 2014. But Russia's decision to attack knowing there will be consequences raises a few eyebrows. Is Russia turning against the US and Europe, which have dominated and had a strong hold on international affairs for decades? Russia is facing sanctions and keeps facing them. They have been cut off from the SWIFT system that connects financial institutions, and thousands of companies have voluntarily fled from the country. Couple it with the COVID pandemic and its ongoing war with Ukraine, you might think that Russia's economy is crumbling, but that is not the case. While the West has united to decouple Russia, Russia has turned east. The developing nations of the world do not decry Russia's war. Why would they when there is a safer option and benefit in forging an alliance? This begs to ask the question, is the East looking for a new way forward where they are free from the shackles of the previous global powers of the world? Is the power shifting to the East? What makes a global power anyway? What was it that the US, Europe, and its Western allies had that made them a global power? In a globalized, economized world, armed conflict can prove expensive. But with rising democracy, a strong economy plays with large and growing markets is an indicator of skilled human resources and the autonomy to create, produce, and export goods and services while attracting foreign investment. A powerful military shows the country's ability to protect its interest and deter aggression from countries and power projects around the world. Add diplomatic relations and their influence on the international agenda to promote their interests, to understand the powerhouses that have the most influence on global affairs. Countries that denounce Russia or are West-leaning amount to 61.2% of the global GDP. On the other hand, countries that have remained neutral, lean towards Russia, or even support them, comprise 2/3 of the world population. While the West has sided against Russia, developing nations with great potential for economic growth have a different intent. A year and a half into the Ukraine attacks, more countries, especially ones in the Middle East and Africa, have become increasingly neutral and leaning towards Russia, or in other words, leaning away from the Western powers. Russia supplied 20% of the global oil, and since the West has put up sanctions, their trade has mostly diverted east. Nearly half of Russia's economy comes from oil, and China has doubled their overall imports with Russia. When the G7, European Union, and Australia tried to interfere with Russia's oil transport by sea, China refused to comply. Russian oil is now being supplied to other countries at a cheaper price, and Russia has increased their monthly revenue from oil from $14.6 billion to $20 billion in 2022, as it benefits from its diverted oil trade with China and India. On an economic scale, the United States of America boasts the largest GDP in the world, but China is catching up and is close. China's GDP is already bigger than the whole of the European Union combined, and it is forming its own unions. China will have overtaken the US in GDP by 2025 and thrown itself as the largest economy in the world. Russia and China are important trading partners with transactions worth $190 billion in 2022 between the countries. A 30% increase from 2021, the highest ever recorded between Russia and China. Moving away from the dollar dependency, Russia and China are holding their trade in yuan ruble, which has surged by more than 1,067% since the Ukraine invasion. China is trying to move away from the dollar, and the Chinese yuan has become the most used currency for Chinese cross-border transactions. On moving away from the dollar, the Russian ruble was used in 40% of the export transactions of Shanghai Cooperation Countries, SCO, in Eurasia. India, despite having close ties with the US, is a non-aligned nation, but it considers China a threat and buys weapons from Russia. India-Russia, too, has a vast amount of bilateral trade worth $8 billion. Even India has started using yuan as a currency to trade for oil with Russia. Even though India is far off on the economic scale, it too has the potential for growth. China and India are two of the most populous countries in the world, and their stellar growth rate for decades shows signs of following their East Asian counterparts in realizing their potential for growth. Japan and the Four Dragons of Asia, which include Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and South Korea, had an economic boom from the 1960s to the 1990s and still fare well in the economy, though they might be facing stagflation with an economic growth of 2% or less and political turmoil. Regions such as Southeast Asia and East Asia have made significant progress in the late 20th century. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has a population bigger than the EU and combined makes one of the biggest economies in the world, with an estimated GDP of $3.66 trillion in 2022 and has a population of over 700 million, and urbanization and consumer growth growing at a massive rate. ASEAN has stepped up since the 1990s in productivity gain sectors such as manufacturing, retail, telecommunications, and transportation. The oil-rich regions of the Middle East, too, have become some of the wealthiest countries in the world. In the Middle East, the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, might not have as high a population, but host countries with some of the highest GDP per capita in the world, with a total GDP of $3.464 trillion. With significant sources of oil and gas reserves, the Middle East gas has substantial revenue from oil reserves or petrodollars. They're also trying to move away from complete oil dependency, adding diversity to their industries. The United States of America spent $877 billion on the military in 2022, but China spent a huge amount as well, with $292 billion. The United States of America and EU countries might be the highest military spenders, but there are 5 Asian countries and Russia in the top 10 countries. Russia, since its invasion of Ukraine, has increased its military spending by 9.2% in 2022 to $86.4 billion, and the threat it poses has made Sweden and Finland apply for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, whose member states spend a total of $1,232 billion. China, one of the rising powerhouses in the world, is in support of Russia. While leaders in the Western world have personally met Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in person, Chinese President Xi Jinping is meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Biden administration considers China a major threat, viewing it as a pacing challenge in terms of military, economy, technology, and diplomacy, making it well known in their national defense strategy. All the while, China is increasingly seeking to take back Taiwan, which it claims is its territory, but Taiwan's sovereignty is backed by the US. Tensions are growing between China and the US on the waterfront in the South China Sea too, as the US Navy patrols too close to the coastal lines, which China sees as a violation of their sovereignty and security. The South China Sea is a strategic waterway, where a third of global shipping worth $3.4 trillion passed in 2016, and holds invaluable resources such as fish, oil, and gas. The US has established the Indo-Pacific strategy that perhaps serves its interest to be relevant in the Pacific region and has west-leaning Asian countries in the region, yet it is far away from its rivals China, who are establishing its dominance in the maritime Silk Road. As nuclear diminution is still a work in progress, newer technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and communications are changing how wars are fought. There is already hesitance on Wall Street to invest in Chinese tech companies that serve the purpose of China's People's Liberation Army to develop weapons that threaten Americans. President Xi, too, prohibits Chinese tech companies from being listed on Wall Street, as they do not want to share technology with Western powers. While the largest economies of the West have the Group of Seven, or G7, to coordinate global economic policies, the Third World left out by these nations has formed its own Group of 77, or G77, now comprising 134 countries, to promote their collective economic interests and negotiation capacity in the UN. Meanwhile, China is showing its solidarity with its neighbors by organizing the China Central Asia Summit to promote freight trade, cultural tourism, and create deeper economic links. The European Union, EU, might be one of the best integrated political and economic unions. Asian countries, too, are showing solidarity with their own ways of regional cooperation, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, which consists of both Russia and China, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, and Bay of Bengal Initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation. BIMSTEC. The biggest cooperation in the global south is BRICS, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which already have a population and economy larger than the EU. There are talks that they are working on swaying away from de-dollarization with their own currency, though it has also been denied. Not to forget, there's China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, intended to connect China with the rest of the world, to establish access to the markets, and develop infrastructures throughout the routes to establish economic and political power. BRI connects East Asia, the Middle East, Russia, and leading up to Europe by reviving and revving up the historical Silk Road, and a maritime sea route that connects Eastern and Southeastern Asian countries in the Pacific and Indian Ocean, from Asia to Africa, and ending in Europe. As of now, China has managed to bring together diplomatic ties in the Middle East between Saudi Arabia and Iran, ending decades of conflict. A stable region offers better prospects for the energy and economic trade for China. It imports most of its petroleum from Saudi Arabia and has reportedly signed deals worth $400 million with Iran in 2021. These activities reflect a receding influence of the US and a geological power shifting to the east. As Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei puts it, Asia will become the center of knowledge, the center of economics, as well as the center of political power and the center of military power. Looking into the current state of affairs, the world is moving from a unipolar and bipolar power to a multipolar world. The West might have enjoyed decades of dominance on the international scene, but their powers are waning and the East is on the rise. As countries strive for self-dependence, the East is slowly gaining control and becoming interdependent in its own sphere. One thing is for sure, the East is on the rise. It raises another question: how far will it go?